welcome back to the What the Falk Sunderland Preview Podcast. Depending on your definition of a derby, it's officially derby week on Wearside. No, we're not facing our Saudi-loving, silly dancing, Pontyland Airport claiming, I'd love it if we beat them. I tell you, love it. Neighbours from 8 Mile up the road. But indeed, we are facing our far more pleasant, Janino worshipping, Parmo eating. It's only really a derby if we beat them, pretend the enemies from Middlesbrough at the Stadium of Light on the rather annoying time of 12 noon this Sunday. Thankfully, I've somehow managed to get one of those big, horrible Boro enemies onto the podcast in the shape of the lovely Tom from the rather excellent Boro Breakdown. Tom, that was a long-ass intro. How are you doing, mate? Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm doing quality, mate. Thanks. How are you?
Yeah, I just couldn't resist getting the digging at the mags, so I thought I might as well. It's not.
I'm all for it.
Yeah, why not? I didn't think you'd disagree with me, so I'm all happy with that. But we normally start in a different way and talk about recent form, but as it is a quote-unquote derby, let's get one thing out of the way here. We've got an alleged Boro legend in our dugout. You've got a Newcastle fan in yours. I think there's many on both sides. I probably don't see it as a massive derby. But how much does that add to Boro fans? Sort of exciting for the game with Mowbray being in charge on Sunday?
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird one, to be honest. It's probably not somewhere we would have expected to ever come up against Mowbray, but he's had his time at Boro. Went to Blackburn from there. We couldn't have kind of argued, and I suppose it was a good opportunity for him. It's just a bit strange, isn't it? You never expect to see like a club legends in your rival's dugout. Like you wouldn't expect to see like Niall Quinn in our dugout or even, would you? It'd just be strange.
Yeah, it's a bit odd because obviously we've had players that have gone to and from, and I think probably the biggest like icon for us that went on to do really well for you was, off the top of my head, Julio Walker. And it was a bit odd. And when he scored against us, I know he didn't celebrate and stuff, but Walker's probably just out of that like iconic legends like Quinn, Mowbray, Bernie Slaven for you, and you just never really expected it to be. And to be fair, he's doing a pretty fine job, but he said something the other week and it did make me laugh because I thought, I wonder what Boro fans think about that, because I don't think you can hear in his accent the way that he speaks, and everyone who knows his history knows Mowbray is proper Boro. But he came out the other week and he said Sunderland are the biggest club in the Championship. I don't know whether you heard it, but how did Boro fans react to that, if you did?
To be honest, there wasn't that much reaction. I think from us, I did hear it, and I was a bit surprised to hear him say that. But no, I don't think that kind of really made the rounds about us. I think at the moment we're kind of preoccupied with how we're doing at the league and the turnaround that Michael Carrick's produced. So I don't know if that's just kind of flew under the radar a little bit, but I didn't see any reaction really at all from our side for that comment.
It's funny, obviously I don't want to stick on Mowbray too long, but I've started with him, so I'll finish with him. I think with Tony Mowbray, he's obviously very well liked and he didn't get too bad of a reaction. I was at the game at the Riverside and obviously he didn't get too bad of a reaction, but because, like I say, it's a derby, not a derby, isn't it? But has his appointment at Sunderland and his kind of subsequent relationship with Sunderland now, because he's done quite well, soured his legendary status with any Boro fans, or is it just like, it is what it is?
I think it's more it is what it is, yeah. I mean, weirdly, I can't remember who you guys were played. I think it might have been Norwich on the day where he was kind of first spotted in the stadium.
Yeah.
So me and Johnny from Boro Breakdown, we were in hospitality for our game against Swansea that day. Of course, you guys were the early kickoff, and he was actually in the box with us on that day. So he's clearly gone to the Sunderland game and then came back to watch Boro. But he always kind of talks about it every time he's been anywhere else. Like, when he's been at Blackburn and stuff, he's always kind of saying, I've been back to Boro to watch me kids play football on a Sunday, and people come and talk to us about Boro and stuff like that. I think because he's had his time at Boro and he did kind of, I think a lot of people were sad that he had to leave at that point. He was obviously replaced by Karanka, who did very well, but we all kind of look back on that and like realise that Mowbray did lay a lot of the foundations for what was to come under Karanka. I think you left with a lot of good feeling from Boro fans, and I don't think there's too much that could kind of sour that legendary status, to be honest.
It's interesting. I'm going to come back to that because you touched on something about Himalayan foundations, which is a really interesting comment. I will come back to it because most interestingly, obviously, we want to move away from our gaffer for a wee bit. Obviously, if I'm honest with you, I've been a bit jealous of both the appointments Boro have made. The last two, obviously, one's worked out so far, one really didn't. But I thought Michael Carrick was a really excellent appointment. I think he's, as a player, potentially one of the most underrated players that's ever existed in the last 20 years. Terrific player, didn't play half enough for England as he should have done, but an excellent appointment. And I think obviously his stature as a coach was really highly rated, but he's had an immediate impact. That does sometimes happen, but we're now talking, he's going into 6-7 games where he's winning them off back to back. What has he actually done that's created such an improvement in Boro?
I think there's a couple of things. I think the thing people will notice the most when they watch us play is the change in formation. We've gone from that kind of famous 5-3-2 under Chris Wilder with the overlapping centre backs to a 4 at the back. It's kind of more of a 4-2-3-1, but kind of an asymmetric one, and I'm sure anyone who plays Football Manager who listens is really going to appreciate that. But you'll notice it on our left-hand side. Riley McGree plays on the left of that free behind the striker, but he's not a left winger. He's kind of more of a playmaker, like a number 10, floating around the left-hand side. And what you have on that left-hand side is Ryan Giles, who the main strength for him is his distribution. It's not really as a defensive left back, so you've got him overlapping quite a lot. And then in the middle, you got Hayden Hackney, who Leo brought in when he was caretaker manager. Carrick's kind of continued that and helped develop him as a player, and also got Chuba Akpom playing in the number 10 role, which was spotted pretty much as soon as he came in that he could play that role and would be effective in that role. And I think he scored in all but 2, I think, of the games. Might be all but 3 now after Millwall, that Carrick's been in charge. So in terms of the formation there, it's really been moving things around to kind of really play to everyone's strengths. There was always an emphasis on possession anyway under Chris Wilder. So I don't know if you might have seen it, but there was something that Sport Bible picked up on a couple of weeks ago. It was like a viral TikTok video where it was kind of breaking down Carrick's time at Boro over the 9 or 10 games he'd had at that point, and comparing us to, like, Barcelona and like Man United and stuff with some of the play patterns. And that's maybe over exaggerating a little bit, because I think to go back to what I said earlier, the foundations were really there from under Chris Wilder anyway, under playing possession football. And that's where the other part of what Carrick's done kind of really comes into it as well, because he's came and he's had to pick those players up. Under Chris Wilder, what we had, especially this season, where we had all the stuff regarding the links to Burnley, and especially during the summer, it did seem like he was really trying to get his own way, and the club wanted to go a different way, and it did seem kind of really soured. But you had poor displays. But Chris Wilder throwing players under the bus in post-match interviews. There was a point, I can't remember who it was against, but he blamed 8 individual mistakes in the lead up to a goal. And we covered it on the pod. We were like, you can't blame 8 individual mistakes on the run up to a goal. That's your job. That's your individual mistake for not having the players drilled to kind of effectively cope with that. So the other thing Carrick had to do as soon as he came in was pick those players up and kind of really, put the arm around them, man-manage them, and get them playing with confidence again. Because we had a good team to begin the season with. I think one of the things that Chris Wilder used to come out about in the interviews, especially during the transfer window, was promises about marquee signings, and some of our fans kind of really picked up on that. But realistically, many other Championship teams signing Zach Steffen and Ryan Giles, and especially Zach Steffen, and paying him the type of money that he's likely on, I generally think that they were the marquee signings that he kept mentioning. So we had a strong squad anyway, and they don't all turn rubbish overnight, which they were getting a lot of stick at that time. So I think what Carrick's done in terms of coming in, motivating them, but also fitting them seamlessly into this new system. He has done quite a lot, but he'll say it was tweaks, and you can kind of see what he means with in terms of foundations already being there, and like I said, just kind of moving some pieces around and picking the players up.
Interesting you touched on Wilder there, because obviously we spoke earlier in the season. I spoke on your podcast, and obviously your pal was on mine and stuff like that. Johnny was on mine, and I remember speaking to him about Wilder, and he was saying positive things, but the way I was hearing it was like, I really hope it works out, but I'm starting to really, really worry here. And I picked it up from yourself, obviously, when it came on yours as well. And you could almost feel in the ground. The atmosphere was really good at the Riverside. I've got to be honest. It was a good atmosphere that night. It felt more like a derby because the atmosphere was good. But in terms of the feeling around the ground, you could see Boro fans weren't 100% confident. They were like, well, we'll see. And it felt it all emanated from Chris Wilder. Now, a few weeks previous with the Alex Neil stuff, obviously had Alex Neil, who then went to Stoke, and he just went and yada, yada, yada. Then Mowbray comes in. But with Wilder, it felt like he was flirting with like a load of different clubs, and it felt like that really affected his time at Boro, because there's no denying Chris Wilder's a good manager, seems like a decent enough bloke, apart from the time when he blamed us for Jack Rodwell being absolutely shite. Don't understand why he found that one. That indicates he's maybe not as nice a bloke as I thought he was. But I think in all seriousness, you can see the job Wilder did at Sheffield United. He did good jobs elsewhere as well, but it just didn't click at Boro. Is it as simple as saying that it just felt like he didn't want to be there, and that kind of went onto the fans, that then went onto the players, or was there just more to it?
I think you spot on with that, because it really coincides with those Burnley links when we started going downhill. If you'd have seen us, first 10 games, maybe 15 games of Wilder's reign, we were playing some outstanding football when he came in. We played, I don't know if it was Forest we played on Boxing Day, but we absolutely ripped them apart. Our pressing at that point, we pressed them so well that Dean Yates ended up scoring an own goal when they were trying to play out from the back. And we were doing great. And then those Burnley links came along, and we started to stumble a little bit, and we never really picked up that same form towards the end of the season. We came back from the international break, beat Peterborough 4-1, and then went downhill straight away again. So I do think it was that he was, flirting with other clubs. And, Kieran Scott's done quite a few interviews, our head of football, since Wilder left. And reading between the lines of what he's saying, and he doesn't come out and say it directly or name Chris Wilder or anything like that. It just sounds like Chris Wilder was constantly looking at other clubs and also refused to kind of work in the same kind of system, the same kind of structure, that we wanted to work in. Because as soon as Michael Carrick came in, what's his face? Kieran Scott was saying, my job really kind of starts now in terms of the recruitment, and we've restructured the whole scouting department since that's happened. And Wilder was the manager, Carrick's the head coach. It really seems like there is quite a difference there. And earlier in the season, I will say the last pre-season game that we had at the Riverside, we played Marseille. We absolutely battered them and played some absolutely fantastic football that night. And then as soon as the season started, we were unlucky in the first couple of games, I would say. West Brom, Stoke, Sheffield United. But we never really seemed to get running. And, I spoke to the Shoreham View around the time we played Sheffield United at home, which I think was 4 games in. And they were like, it's fine. Wilder's always a slow start. But the longer it kind of dragged on, the more we were kind of like, when are we actually going to pick up? And you mentioned it earlier, the game against Sunderland at Riverside, fans feeling nervous. That was definitely the case. That 1-0 win, I mean, it came, it was a hard game. And I think we were possibly quite lucky at that point that Ross Stewart got injured in the warm-up. Because I thought Ellis Sims had a very good game and was a handful that night. And it just looked dangerous all the time, and we were all kind of very nervous. That goal definitely helped lift us a little bit, but I think even after that, you guys were looking dangerous, and the way we were playing at that point, I wouldn't be so well. I would say quite a few of us were surprised that we held on and managed to keep a clean sheet. Obviously, we were absolutely buzzing about it because, I think depending on how old you are and where you're from here, it is still a derby. But it was a very tough game, and like we've both said, the atmosphere that night, it was very edgy. So it was probably for the best at that point that we came through it. It probably bought Wilder a little bit more time as well, I would say.
Yeah, it did feel like it bought him more time because I felt like I honestly thought we'd kick on a little bit from there because I thought, all right, okay, there's their kind of win. That, I mean, in this division, it is probably the biggest game. I know people disagree with me on that, but although I don't really, it's not as same as the Newcastle game, it's nowhere near, but it's still like a game to get your teeth into, if you, for want of a better word. And I thought you'd really kick on from there. But it's interesting you touched on how you felt the game was nervy all night, because I think a lot of Sunderland fans will remember that game as being like one of our poorer performances of the season. But I think we spoke about it on our podcast afterwards and said we always felt like we were in it, even though we probably shouldn't have been. But when I look at the circumstances surrounding that game, obviously we lost Ross Stewart 8 minutes before kickoff, which really wasn't helpful. And I remember the atmosphere around the away end was like, for want of a better word, shite. It was like, brilliant. Well, what do we do now? And then I think Tony Mowbray spoke about how you had to change it and stuff like that. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think that was Amad Diallo's debut, and I think everyone can see how good Amad's gone on to be. But then on the flip side, Middlesbrough at the same time under a different manager, they were very nervy. Different things were happening. So talking of that game, Stewart's back. So it's not going to take us 45 minutes to get into the game like it did last time. Mowbray and the team are far more settled. On the flip side, Middlesbrough's a completely different beast to what they were then. How different do you think this game is going to be in comparison to that game earlier in the season?
I think it's going to be very different. I will say for that game earlier in the season as well, I don't think either team was playing to their full potential. I think looking at the games we previously had under Wilder, that was absolutely nowhere near the level it could have been. And I think, like you say, a lot of Sunderland fans would say it was one of the poorer performances. One of my best mates is a Sunderland fan, and I know he definitely said that to me that night. I think, if I'm remembering rightly, Jack Clark had a bit of a shocker that game.
Oh, it was horrendous that night, and I really liked Jack, but he was awful that night. He absolutely done my head in. Every cross went about 40 yards into the stand.
Yeah, that's exactly what I can remember. And Pritchard probably should have scored quite early in the game as well. So, like you say, it's completely different. Completely different now. I think with the influence of Carrick and being quite a calm figure, I think, as you'd probably expect from watching his playing career, I do think that we won't get carried away with what you could possibly usually expect from a derby game. Where there might be tackles flying and all over the place and stuff. I still think we're going to be trying to play our game, and I'm pretty sure you guys will still be playing exactly the same way you have been anyway. So it's going to be an interesting one to watch. I think these games are always the type where form and stuff like that can go out the window, but I don't expect that so much this time, because I think both teams are really settled, and I think it's going to be, it's not going to be hard, but it's going to be a much better game than earlier in the season.
Yeah, I think so as well. I think it did take us 45 minutes to get going because of, I think, Stu being injured, and you had 8 minutes to change it and bring someone else in. And like you said, it was a really nervy game, but Carrick's obviously in charge. We've touched on Carrick a little bit. In terms of the way Boro play now, I'll be honest, you haven't really been on the telly that much. So I've only seen the highlights, and there's not much you can talk about from goals. You're like, oh, there, Boro won again. So things have obviously changed, but is the style that different? Because you touched before on it being tweaks, but is the style that different from what Wilder had you playing, or is it just playing the same, similar style with more confidence?
I would say it's still possession style with more confidence, but there are quite a few tweaks. As I mentioned earlier, on that left-hand side, we're mainly looking for overlaps from Giles to be able to get his crosses in. I think at this point he's still top for assists in the league, and Akpom's still top scorer, and that's pretty much why, because of Giles crosses into the box, Akpom being in the right place, right time, and getting his head on stuff. But we also do something now which we didn't do a lot under Wilder, which was just playing out from the back and really utilising Zach Steffen, which some of our fans really dislike because they just think as soon as he has the ball at his feet, he should be kicking it long. But we tend to kind of play through in the middle and try and get Howson or Hackney on the half turn and really kind of play through any press. So I would say that was something that we weren't doing under Wilder, despite having Steffen. I think a lot of his distribution at that point was to Crooks and kind of that right centre mid position. But what you will also notice as well, for anyone who is familiar with Matt Crooks and Marcus Force, Matt Crooks is actually playing as our number 9 at the moment, which we would never have expected as a 6'4" centre midfielder. He's kind of playing as that pressing forward. He's always had the capability to press in him, I think, because when we really kind of started that pressing style under Wilder, he was the one leading it from the right centre midfield slot and did well at it. But also Marcus Force is playing on the right-hand side now, instead of Isaiah Jones, who was completely dropped for the last game just to kind of take him out of the spotlight, apparently. So, yeah, he's kind of being managed at the moment and trying to get him back to his best. But Force is actually doing all right on the right-hand side. He scored in the last game from cutting inside onto his left foot and hitting an absolutely great strike into the bottom corner past the Millwall keeper. But he's not playing as kind of a traditional winger. He has, in the last couple of games, brought out quite a few step overs and a touch past the defender out of nowhere, which I've never seen him do before. So maybe he's trying to incorporate that into his game a little bit. But he's kind of playing more the way that we had Christian Stuani playing on the right wing when under the Karanka days. So it's kind of like having a striker on the right, a striker in the number 10 slot, and a centre midfielder playing as a striker in the number 9 slot. So that kind of combination seems to be working for us quite well at the moment as well. But like I say, it is still possession style with a lot more confidence, and you can definitely tell that from the players when they get the ball.
I wanted to come back to it. I've just remembered because I said I'd come back to it, so I better do so. Tony Mowbray, obviously from our side, you touched on him before when he's at Boro, is setting a lot of the foundations now. I think I said to you at the time I wasn't sure about Mowbray's a new appointment. It certainly wasn't an exciting one. No offense, Tony. Sort of 4 months down the line, I actually really like him. He's a bit like a granddad. He looks after the young players really well. And we have I think it's the joint lowest average age for the squad. And a lot of our players are under the age of 24 because it fits the model. Do you think Sunderland fans are seeing the benefit of what Boro fans eventually got from Tony Mowbray? Like, do you think he's like the kind of manager that will lay really good foundations for Sunderland, essentially, like he did at Boro? And then when the next manager comes in, he's going to benefit from that. Is that Tony Mowbray's kind of key attribute, is building a team and then leaving it to someone who can take you a little bit further?
I think that might be a little unfair to him, kind of based on the situation he was in at Boro, and probably at Blackburn as well, although they do seem to be bottling a little bit at the moment. But at Boro, he was definitely working with one hand tied behind his back in terms of the transfer market. We didn't have a lot of money to spend. He came in right after Gordon Strachan bought the entire SPL and tried to fit them into a championship team. So there wasn't a lot of money there at all. And some of the signings that he made, you look at them now, it's like Faris Haroun from Beerschot in Belgium, I think it was, very low fee. Mallory Martin, free transfer. Curtis Main, free transfer. I think was playing for Darlington right before he signed for us and ended up playing our first team. I think one of the biggest fees he paid around that time was Lucas Jukovic, and that was about $1 million. In terms of laying the foundations, it was the likes of Grant Ledbetter, George Friend, Dean Whitehead that he brought into the team, and they were absolute mainstays. Daniel Ayala as well. That was pretty much done by the time he was sacked, and then he played in Mark Venus's game as caretaker, and then went on to feature, most of the time under Karanka as well. So, Albert Adoma as well. I could forget about him, but he brought him in. But in terms of laying the foundations, I would say that was all kind of pretty much done by the last season, where we had a little bit more money to spend. But I don't know what quite happened that season. I don't know if the confidence was maybe gone by then, but he did have us playing good football at times, and like I said, with one hand tied behind his back in the transfer market, we came quite close to the playoffs quite a few times, and he did well with what he had. So I'm sure, if backed at Sunderland, he could probably make a team to go further than just laying the foundations. He's done it before at West Brom, getting them at the Premier League. So I think if backed, he could do well. It's just he probably needs that from the higher ups. I'm not so sure he had that at Blackburn either, so it might be a bit of a test for him to kind of get back to doing that. But he can absolutely do it, and get you kind of further than, like I say, just laying the foundations.
I think it's funny you mentioned about Mowbray. He has gone into a lot of jobs that have been, well, the Venky's was batshit. But there's a lot of teams where he's gone into and it's kind of like a fixer-upper. He's probably got a bit more freedom with something where there's potentially a little bit more money, a little bit more of a scouting system in there. So fingers crossed. Like I say, he's done a great job, and he touched on he played good football there. I spoke to West Brom earlier in the year. They said about how good the football was, and some of our goals this season have made us look like Barcelona at points. So I can't really argue with it being the same at Sunderland. In terms of the game itself on Sunday, obviously, I wanted to ask a really big question. Now, I think a lot of people know I used to work for Middlesbrough Women, so I've got a few Boro mates from that kind of era of my life. Who do Boro fans hate more? Also, or that up the road? I've always felt it was Newcastle, but I want to see if my assumption's actually correct.
I would definitely say it's Newcastle out of everyone kind of up north, in the northeast. I do think there's maybe a little bit of a divide based on age and where you're located on Teesside. So I think older fans from across the river in Thornaby, Middlesbrough area hate Leeds more than Sunderland and Newcastle. But I'm from Billingham, so there's a large Sunderland contingent in Billingham anyway. I'm sure probably some of them listening to this now. So for me, and especially growing up on Boro in the Premier League, hate Newcastle. Sunderland to a lesser extent. Like I say, one of my best mates is a Sunderland fan, so there's kind of that in it as well. When you were in League One, I was kind of low key supporting you because I want my mate to be back in the same league. But yeah, I think when I was a kid, it was always Newcastle we hated more. It might have been partly due to the fact as well, and this isn't a dig that Sunderland weren't in the Premier League at parts of that period growing up as well. It was always kind of us and Newcastle, which were the mainstays. But yeah, definitely Newcastle hated over Sunderland, I think.
Excellent. I've got to agree with that. I far prefer Middlesbrough to Newcastle. That will surprise nobody. In terms of the game itself, obviously Ross Stewart is obviously a huge piece of the jigsaw for Sunderland. And he was obviously injured last time he played you and then subsequently missed the further 3 months after that. You're on great form, don't get me wrong, but every side at this level has a weak spot, no matter what. With Sunderland having a relatively fully fit squad, where are Middlesbrough weak? Where, if Sunderland are going to win this game, where is it going to be won?
See, the only times I've kind of really see us get outplayed and beaten under Carrick have been Burnley and Brighton, which, Carrick's only had 3 losses. Preston, the first game, was pretty much hard to judge. But the similarity between Burnley and Brighton was playing a really fast possession style and pressing quite high up the pitch. That being said, like I said earlier, we can play through presses, and we've done that quite effectively. I think it's just when you're playing teams of certain levels, like I say, Burnley or Brighton, it is much harder to do. That being said, I think possibly our left side, with Giles being more attacking, that is probably our one weak point, I think, and especially at the moment as Darragh Lenihan's out injured, or at least he has been for the last couple of games. I don't know what they haven't confirmed what the injury is and how long he's going to be out, but I would likely think that it's going to be a centre-back pairing of Dale Fry and Paddy McNair, with Paddy McNair playing on the left-hand side of that, which I don't know what he was like for you guys and what kind of position he was used in. He's pretty much played everywhere for us, but I don't like him at centre-back, to be honest. I think he's more of a centre midfielder or...
Yeah, I think the same.
Under Chris Wilder, when we played the overlapping centre-backs, I thought that right-sided centre-back role was absolutely perfect for him, and it just kind of didn't work out that way. But yeah, in terms of our defence, it's that left-hand side, and we're quite short in defence at the moment with the injuries. We've got Darragh Lenihan, Matt Clark, Anthony Dijksteel all out at the moment. So Fry and McNair are our only options. So I would definitely say it's probably that side of things where we're probably weakest.
I think looking at Paddy McNair, he was probably best in attacking midfield for us, but the problem was the team was absolutely shite at that point. As people remember, that was a championship season. I think we're starting in the Premier League season, and then he just got consistently injured. I think he did his ACL. Came back, and when he came back, he scored some really good goals. Just the team was rubbish, so it didn't really matter. And then obviously went to Boro, and the rest is history. Now, obviously, final question is always predictions, but I've got an encyclopedic memory of Sunderland games, and even I struggle to remember the last time Sunderland beat Middlesbrough. So I actually Google it, which is unusual for me. The last time we beat you in any competition was 2012 in the FA Cup at the Riverside. The last time Sunderland beat Middlesbrough at the Stadium of Light was September 2008, when Michael Chopra scored 2 goals, which is a bit worrying and a bit concerning. However, when a run of games, you've won, I think, 6 of the last 7 or 5 of the last 6. So that's quite a fair few spread out over a few years. But when you have a run like that in any game, especially if it's derby, quote unquote, you do start thinking, well, that's got to end at some point. I remember going to St James's when Defoe scored the last time we played Newcastle and thinking, oh, this has got to end at some point. It didn't, but the winning run ended, and it ended in a draw. I know there's no such thing as superstition, really, or things changing. It's on that 90 minutes. But are Boro fans a little bit worried about this weekend at all?
I think you always are about derby games. Like, you never want to lose them. I know for a fact, because I work with a Sunderland fan as well, if we lose it, I'm getting stick off my best mate. I'm getting stick when I go into work next week. So there's always that thought where I really hope we don't lose it. I don't think anyone's worried in like how we're playing or anything like that. Like I say, we're on really good form at the moment. It's just it's always like a perfect storm, isn't it? We're on good form. We haven't lost there since 2008. We were linked with Ross Stewart consistently over the last 2 windows. Something's got to give, and it'll probably end up being like 1-0 Sunderland or something, and you know, we'll be absolutely fuming with it. But yeah, I don't think based on how we're playing at the moment, anyone's kind of looking at it like, oh God, like not looking forward to this game. I think everyone is kind of still really up for it.
I'm actually really excited for the game. I think Boro is one of those games where I don't see it as a derby at all. However, when you get in the kind of stadium, be it Riverside or the Stadium Light, the atmosphere is always decent, and we want to get stuck into each other, and suddenly it becomes a derby for like 90 minutes. And I think the way both sides are playing, we both play attacking possession-based football. I think we're both really nice sides to watch from what you said before, and obviously your results show that. I think we're a very nice football side to watch as well, and there's a lot of good attacking players on both sides. And last time we played each other, we were both not that good, and we drew 3-3. That was probably because both defences weren't that good that day. I'm going to say 2-2. I think high scoring draw would be my prediction, but bear in mind, I've got 2 of them right this season, so I'm not very good at predictions, so it's probably not going to be 2-2. If you're a betting person, never ever listen to what my predictions are. But Tom, what's your prediction?
Well, I've got to stick with what I said on our pod on Sunday. So I've got 2-1 Boro, but I do have Ross Stewart scoring in that because I just think it's pretty much nailed on to happen. Like I say, he's been linked with us the last 2 windows, and like I say, I don't think I think he's a pretty safe with him at the moment. I don't believe he's going anywhere, and I mean we've just signed Cameron Archer, so I think that pretty much ended our interest in him, but. He's definitely going to score. I think at the moment we tend to go in at half time, even if we're losing 1-0 like we did at Blackburn, knowing that we're going to come out for the second half better and we can turn it around. So one of the things I would look out for if I was you guys would be a kind of big second half improvement from Boro. I think that's become kind of quite a regular thing in our last few games. So. Like I say, even if it's 1-0 at half time, I still fancy us to come back and turn it around. So I'll stick with 2-1.
In terms of obviously the podcast, I'm going to be on yours directly after this. So Sunderland fans, if they want to hear how well I represent Sunderland or how well I don't represent Sunderland, where can they find the Boro Breakdown? Because it is a great pod. Obviously, I worked with you beforehand when I was at Boro Women, and it's something that I naturally do tune into. But where can it be found if other people haven't heard it before?
So we're on all podcast streaming apps, Spotify, Acast, Apple Podcasts, also on YouTube. Under the if you just search Boro Breakdown, you'll find our channel on there. And also, if you want to kind of look at any of our social content, we always do kind of snippets from the pods. That's a Boro_Breakdown on Twitter, and then we're on Facebook and Instagram as well under Boro Breakdown.
Perfect. Tom, pleasure as always, mate. Absolutely zero luck when it comes to Sunday, but go on. I wish you luck for the rest of the season. Like I say,
I do so.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.